This immediate existence is at the same time not solely and simply immediate consciousness, but is religious consciousness. The immediacy has inseparably the meaning not only of a self-consciousness that immediately is, but also of the Supreme Being as an absolute essence in pure thought, or absolute being. What we are conscious of in our notion, that is, that being is essence, is what the religious consciousness is also conscious of. This unity of being and essence, of thought which is immediately existence, is both the thought of this religious consciousness, or its mediated knowledge, and equally its immediate knowledge. For this unity of being and thought is self-consciousness and is itself immediately present, or the thought unity has at the same time this existential shape of what it is. Here, therefore, God is revealed as He is. He is immediately present as He is in Himself. That is, He is immediately present as Spirit. God is attainable in pure speculative knowledge alone and is only in that knowledge, and is only that knowledge itself, for He is Spirit. And this speculative knowledge is the knowledge of the revealed religion. Speculative knowledge knows God as thought or pure essence, and knows this thought as simple being and as existence as the negativity of itself, hence as self, as the self that is at the same time this individual, and also the universal self. It is precisely this that the revealed religion knows. The hopes and expectations of the world up till now had pressed forward solely to this revelation to behold what absolute being is, and in it to find itself. The joy of beholding itself in absolute being enters self-consciousness and seizes the whole world, for it is spirit, it is the simple movement of those pure moments which expresses just this, that only when absolute being is beheld as an immediate self-consciousness is it known as spirit. Paragraph 761 is, you might say, an exciting one. There's a lot going on and being referenced or being mentioned here, being worked through in this longish paragraph. We might think, for example, of these, in the heart of it, being and essence and thought and existence, and the identifications that are taking place with some sort of immediacy and yet also mediacy. We could think of the invocation of speculative knowledge, right? Which is actually right there transliterated in the German, spekulativ, right? And, this is revealing to us what the religious consciousness or self-consciousness is, and we have God being revealed as what God is. And for those who are fans of Hegel and his approach, you'll be no doubt happy to find out that God is indeed spirit or Geist, right? So there's a lot happening here. I actually want to jump to the final bits of this paragraph to highlight something right at the start that otherwise might get dropped out or overlooked. And it has to do with affectivity, with feelings, with desires, with what we can call our emotional side. So he says, this is right after he says, it is precisely this that the revealed religion knows. Then he talks about hopes, right? Hope is a passion. It's also got cognitive aspects to it, but hope is something very important. Hoffnung in this, right? And the expectations. Okay, expectation is more of a action thing, although it's not taking action, just remaining in action, Erwartungen, right? The hopes and expectations of the world up till now had pressed forward solely to this revelation, and we'll talk about what that revelation is. And then we have another key term here. The joy of beholding itself in absolute being enters self-consciousness and seizes the whole world. Now, joy. What is joy? Freude, right? A happiness, a feeling of things being all right, being positive, having attained to something. And there's actually that term, attaining, erreichen, is coming up in terms of what speculative knowledge does. And speculative knowledge is not going to be the kind of musty, abstract thing that we might be worried about it being. So these emotions of hoping, of this comportment of waiting, and this feeling of joy are a central part of what is going on here. We don't want to lose sight of that. And we could contrast this to what was going on in, and I've talked about this many times, so you might be getting a little bit tired of hearing it, but it's absolutely important that we do talk about it. The unhappy consciousness, right? The unglückliche Bewusstsein. It doesn't enjoy these things. I mean, it hopes, but its hopes are disappointed. It's waiting, but it's also taking action. It doesn't have joy or happiness, Glücklichkeit. That's why it's the unhappy consciousness. We have attained to something new, and there's a outpouring and a preparation, you might say, in terms of our affective life at this point. So let's go on and look at the text. He says, this immediate existence is at the same time not solely and simply immediate consciousness, but is religious consciousness. So two things we need to say there. The first thing is, okay, this consciousness, like he just said, is at the same time not just immediate consciousness, right? This immediate existence, but is religious, religiosus consciousness. And as it's going to turn out, it is religious consciousness and self-consciousness. Once again, think back to the very beginning of the religion section when we were talking much more in general before we got into nature religion and religion as art and now revealed religion. Think about the fact that religion by itself for Hegel was already figured as something that was going to be bringing together consciousness and self-consciousness in a new way, which takes the previous developed four paths up until this time, consciousness, self-consciousness, reason, and spirit, and brings them together and transforms them. This is Aufhebung, this is sublation, right? So that's important. This word immediate, for English speakers, this can be a bit misleading, but, what else should we have picked? Unmediated, not mediated. That's a little bit more cumbersome, but it's a little bit closer to, unmittelbar, right? It's not mediated, it's not mediating itself, it is right there, raw for us as, the phenomenologist observing what's going on, and for that consciousness. It has certainty. So, immediate existence is both immediate consciousness, but is also religious consciousness. Now, existence, Dasein, something we're going to see coming up here a little bit later. He goes on and he says, the immediacy, so what's presenting itself as completely immediate, unmediated, has also the meaning, the Bedeutung, right? It is suggesting to us not only of a self-consciousness, so now we're going, it's not just a consciousness, it's also a self-consciousness. The self is thinking about itself in relation to its object, and it is also thinking about itself in relation to others, and to, we might say, a capital O other here as well. So it has the meaning not only of the self-consciousness that immediately is, but also of the supreme being as an absolute essence in pure thought, or absolute being. So we're bringing together a couple different things, right? Supreme being is also absoluten Wesens. This is something that we've been encountering in the past several paragraphs. The absolute essence, the absolute important thing, the thing that is at the center, right? And he says now something really interesting. So we've got self-consciousness, we've got absolute being or supreme being. What we are conscious of. Now, who's the we there? It's us reading Hegel. It's Hegel talking to his contemporaries. It's also all those people back in history when this revelation is taking place who don't quite fully understand what's going on, but are proceeding along the path of the Spirit, along the path of the dialectic, and these things are unfolding for them. He says, in our notion, in our concept, in our Begriff, right, how we are taking these things in as a whole and making sense of them, not just through representation or feeling at this point in time, or bare dogmas or simple practices, but as something that is coherent, something that is connected, and we might even say, to prefigure a little bit, something that is united. So he goes on and he says, what we are conscious of, now notice this, not in the notion or its notion, our notion, right? We are conscious, in our notion, we're in a certain sense being transported back to this important time when revelation is taking place. What are we conscious of? That being is essence. He says, this is what the religious consciousness is also conscious of. Being is essence. And this is where it gets a little, tricky translating-wise, because sometimes Miller actually translates Wesen as being, but what we've got right here is being, Sein, right? So being as such. Now, is this like, any old being? No, this is going to be a little bit more determinate. And then we have essence. Essence is, you might say, a closing in on a certain kind of being that also reveals to us the what matters in being. I understand this sounds a little Heideggerian, but I think that is entirely warranted here. So we have a unity, an Einheit, a oneness, right? A unity of being and thought. This unity of being and thought is self-consciousness, right? So we have a unity of being and essence, of thought which is immediately existence, he says. And now this is very interesting, because up until this point in time, it's all been more or less unmediated, right? I mean, you could say, well, these things are being mediated through each other implicitly, but Hegel's not laying that on the table. Then he says that this unity is both the thought of this religious consciousness or its mediated knowledge, and equally is its immediate knowledge. So we've got mediated knowledge, knowledge through something else, and immediate knowledge, unmittelbar, nothing is standing in the way. And these are, shall we say, mediated with each other. I mean, here's the thing, nothing is ever totally unmediated or immediate for long in the Hegelian dialectic, is it? We always find out there's mediation. The immediate is what it is in relation to the immediate is what it is in relation to the mediate. So it is mediated, right, through its opposite, the mediated. And so this is not completely immediate. It involves mediation. So he goes on and he says, this unity of being, Sein, and thought, that's self-consciousness, and is itself immediately present. Or, this is a really interesting phrase, the thought unity. Now, this is very important too, right? Being is a unity in this case, right? It's a unity of being with essence and existence and thought. And what's really essential here? Well, this unity. Thought can figure to itself. Thought can grasp this unity, however, dimly it does so. Maybe not entirely worked out. Thought is kind of special here compared to being, essence, and existence in that it grasps this unity. And so he goes on and he says, this thought unity has at the same time, and here's where Miller puts into this bracketing, existential shape of what it is. Why is he putting this existential bracketing in here because the word da is there, right? Da ist is in this paragraph, or in this passage, this sentence. And so Miller wants to kind of reflect that by referencing existence, Dasein, which is involved with thought. The thinking being is at the same time an existing being. And it thinks about what exists, not just what has essence, not just what has being or is being, but what is there, what is present to us in the world. So he goes on and he says that here, therefore, now we have an important shift. God is revealed as he is. Now, this revealed in the German, right, offenbar, it's not saying, God reveals himself. It's not saying something is revealing God. God just is this offenbar. It's a predicate of that subject of God. God reveals, you could say, as revealed. That isn't a little bit too tricky. As what he is. Not just as, say, oh, Moses, go let the people out of Egypt. I mean, Moses is smart enough, if we want to go back and think about the Exodus story, to say, what should I say that you are? What's your name? Crazy deity that's, burning a bush there and talking to me and telling me I'm going to do this wild thing. I'm not a good speaker. You want me to go back to Egypt where I killed a man and I could be killed for that. You got this, whole interesting thing going on. Who are you? And God says, instead of saying, well, I am, and then naming something, God says what God is. I am that am, this complex, tricky phrase that references being, particularly in the Greek translation, the Septuagint, right? So God is revealed as what he is, and what is it that God is? He says, he is immediately present as he is in himself, an sich. He is immediately present, how? Spirit, Geist, mind, if you like. What it is that the entire phenomenology is about. This is the phenomenology of Geist. So God is revealing what Geist is and what he is and how we are connected to that. So now here we get to this interesting point. God is attainable. God can be attained, erreichen, right? We can get to God in an adequate way in pure speculative knowledge alone, and is only in that knowledge, and is only that knowledge itself. So there's a lot going on in there. There's different modes of, reaching God, conceiving of God, and we've seen many of them throughout other sections of the phenomenology. Now we're being given a claim here that it's only through speculative knowledge. So we should think for a minute, what is speculative knowledge? And, it's tempting at first to say, well, we know that there's like speculative or, like pure philosophy, and then there's practical philosophy. And maybe there's some other stuff on the side like, aesthetics or things like that. We can adopt this paradigm that comes to us not just from Kant, but also from earlier philosophers. Actually, going all the way back, you might say, to Aristotle, who distinguished between theoretical and practical philosophy. They have different aims. There's different kinds of truth, right? Is that what Hegel means? Well, it's hard to say that because of something that he says immediately after that would really throw a monkey wrench into that. He says that this speculative knowledge is the knowledge of the revealed religion. Well, what does that mean? So this is all wissens, this is all knowledge in that sense, not knowledge by acquaintance, but like actually knowing things, and presumably there might be some representation, some Vorstellung involved in it, right? But presumably it's notional or conceptual knowledge. It is the knowledge within the notion, particularly given that Hegel has told us that just earlier, right, that God is attainable in pure speculative knowledge and is only in that knowledge and is only that knowledge itself. So the knowledge, the object of the knowledge is also the knowledge. So what do we have here? Speculative must be understood in a different way. And here I think the contrast between mediatedness and immediacy could be helpful to read in. So as speculative knowledge, we're talking about, I would say here, the concept of God, something that we know by, bringing God in a certain way into our own little bit of spirit. We know God is spirit. Within ourselves is something transcending ourselves, something that we can also bring back into ourselves and our knowledge. So that's the mediated side. And then we have knowledge of revealed religion, which, again, we're going to have to clarify, right? At least in some sense, Offenbarung, revelation, is a boom, here you go. This is something that you don't have to worry about its origin at this point in time. Just focus on the content, see what's actually there, because it's, a text, it's an experience, it's a person, it's whatever it's going to be. It could even be something negative that is going to work on you, like very often parables can be, Jesus taught through parables and sometimes actually explained them to his followers who are like, what the hell is that about, right? So speculative knowledge, to go back to this. God is spirit, and this speculative knowledge is how we attain God, and God is only that knowledge itself because he's spirit. So when we are figuring out what God is in speculative knowledge, which is a lot of work, God is there with us. Not just as an object of knowledge, not just as something that's being figured, but, and this is going to sound a little, Christian Platonist, right? God is not a being. God is this very process by which we're conceptualizing God. Let's go on a little bit more. So he tells us that speculative knowledge is the knowledge of the revealed religion. What does that mean at this point? So he says, speculative knowledge knows God as thought, right, or pure essence, and knows this thought as simple being and as existence. All of these are involved, being, thought, essence, existence, and there's something special about existence. Existence as the negativity of itself, right? The negativity of existence, but also the negativity of these other things that it is and isn't. And what does this yield us? Negativity of the self is the self, the selbst. And this self takes on two different sides in this part of revealed religion. He says that the self that is at the same time this individual. Now, this individual is not actually there. It's just, Miller is reading this in. It's desis. Could it be this individual? It makes sense that it would be because Hegel has been talking about individuality. But it's also the universal, allgemeines. It's both at the same time. It is the individual who is, in some respect, a universal. And we're lucky enough to be at the point in time where the human being has developed to be able to grasp this. And he says this is precisely what the revealed religion knows. That God is something not just universal, not just all this metaphysical stuff, but someone who encounters us, who comes forward into existence, the existence that we live, and has something to tell us, something to say to us. Here's where we get to the part that I brought up earlier about these affectivities. It is precisely this that the revealed religion knows. The hopes and expectations of the world up till now had pressed forward solely to this revelation to behold what absolute being is and in it to find itself. Three really important things going on in that sentence, right? Hopes and expectations of Who? The speculative, knower? Yes. But not just the speculative knower, not just the people in that point in time. Everybody. The whole world. Whether they realize it or not, whether they're fortunate enough to get this revelation. Hegel thinks that what is happening here is a very important part of world history, the development of consciousness. So that's one important point. To behold what absolute being is. So there have been a lot of attempts to figure out what absolute being is in a variety of different ways. You could think of everything that was happening in the reason section where, we're trying to figure out this world and where we fit in it and what human beings are and, all the way to like laws of thought and then, into other things that are connected with the ethical substance, and also the Zaka, Selbst, and then we get into the spirit section, and all of this has been tending to try to figure out what is absolute being, right? What is the whole? What is most important? And again, we could go back to this quaternity. Being, what is the absolute being? What is the essence of it? How can we think of it? And does it actually enter into existence, or are we just a bunch of poor slobs down here, outside of the place where essence is or true being is, condemned to some place that doesn't really matter? No, it enters into existence. So the hopes and expectations of the world, to behold what absolute being is. Third important thing, in it, to find itself. We find ourselves in God. We find ourselves in the absolute being, which means that to the degree that we're not focused on that, we're actually piddling around with all sorts of stuff that isn't really at the center of things, and we're not truly knowing ourselves except through absolute being. So he goes on and he says, there's a joy of beholding itself in absolute being, which enters self-consciousness and seizes the whole world. Now, the whole world, that might be a little ambitious if we're talking about Christianity. Obviously, it didn't seize the whole world all at once. But, eventually it extends itself. Maybe you could say Hegel's world is a little bit impoverished. I mean, we know about Hegel thinking that the center of things is really first in Greece, and then in Rome, and then in Europe, right? And that other places aren't quite so important. But, put that aside for the moment. The joy of beholding itself in absolute being. Why? It is spirit. It is the simple movement of those pure moments, which expresses just this. Only when absolute being is beheld as an immediate, unmediated, unmittelbar self-consciousness is it known as spirit. So we have different other ways we could have known absolute being. Again, think about the temple and the statuary and the epic and all these other, God is light. All those are fine as developmental steps for Hegel. What we really want to encounter is a self-consciousness, somebody that we can connect and relate ourselves to. And so all of this has been leading, the religious self-consciousness engages with the individual who is also a universal, and in the process gets to know itself, not just the religious object, not just the God, but gets to know itself and God in spirit, in Geist.